on Zoom, if you can hear me from the chambers.
Matthew,
Yes.
sound guy, but you know when to silence people and then phone to turn on?
It was worse when it was all the other way because everybody thought they had an extra hour up there.
I'd like to call to order the workshop on transforming systems together. This is to have a discussion with the county board regarding how we're working and moving together. My name is Rafael Ortega. I am the commissioner for District 5. I would have everybody around the table introduce themselves, and then I'll ask people in the audience to stand up and shout out their names after we're done here, just so we know who's here. Thank you very much. Rafael Ortega, Commissioner, District 5.
Tony Carter, Commissioner, District 4.
Nicole Fredham, Commissioner, District 1.
Danny Gibbons, Transforming Systems Together Director.
Kathy Hedin, Deputy County Manager of Health and Wellness.
Ling Becker, Workforce Solutions Director.
Ann Berry, Social Services Director.
Matthew Emerson, co-lead of Tier Caldwell, TST Community.
Tanya Long, TST Community Member, Catalyst.
John Day, TST Community Member Lead.
Trista Mattis Castillo, Ramsey County Commissioner, District 3.
Mary Jo McGuire, Commissioner, District 2.
Jim McDonough, Commissioner, District 6.
Ryan O'Connor, County Manager.
John, can you kick it off, John?
No, John, Carlos, member of TST.
Sarah Holly, Director of Public Health. Alex Pitzer, Chief Financial Officer for Ramsey County.
Lerone Bird, Project 1.
Louis Michaela, Community Mediator with Hill Streets. Wilbur Jackson with Hill Streets. Dwayne Gibbons, Community Mediator with Hill Streets. Latrez Morris, Community Mediator with Hill Streets.
Mark Campbell, the Director of the Healing Streets Project.
Karen Francois, Deputy County Manager, Information and Public Records, Ramsey County.
Holly Platt, Controller for Safety and Justice Service Team, Ramsey County.
Scott Williams, Deputy County Manager for Safety and Justice Service Team.
Stacey DeAndrew, County Attorney's Office.
Thank you all and welcome. Oh, me? Go ahead.
Chief Ken, Tom Peck.
Thank you very much. At this point, should I turn it over to you or to Danny?
Unless you want to keep going, Mr. Chair, I'm ready to go.
Okay, good.
So we do have a few TST members online.
Oh, okay. Could we get them on the screen? Oh, could we? There you go.
There's Clara.
Could you please introduce yourselves? I don't know.
Beverly, Claire, could you all please introduce yourself?
I'm Beverly Bushyhead. I am a Native American Community Lead.
Thank you.
My name is Lisa Deputy. I'm one of the TST Community Leads, and my co-lead is Claire Ware. Thank you.
My name is Robert Edwards. I am a TST Community Lead, and my co-lead is Bree. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome.
My name is Claire Ware. Sorry about that, you guys. My name is Claire Ware. I'm a TST community co-lead, and Lisa is my lead. And I think we got Kayin on the phone as well.
Thank you, Claire.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kayin Yang, and I'm one of the TST community lead as well, too. I apologize I can't be there in person, but I'll be listening in. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, does it look good, Danny? Are we missing
we're good. Thank you, Commissioner.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Welcome to everybody who's here today. It's a pleasure to see you all in person. There's been a lot of work that has led up to being here today as a collective for this board workshop. We're excited to be back. We had a fleeting moment last year where we came together in a workshop downstairs. Remember those good times? And then we went back home for a while, but the work never stopped. The work did not stop based on whatever the COVID situation was or whatever else has been swirling around in our broader community. And part of the work that was started 2 budget cycles ago was the idea of transforming systems together, with serious emphasis on every one of those words being intentionally picked. You see a group that's here to present today that represents the idea of what together can mean across our community. You'll hear about processes that have been developed to work through how we transform and think about transforming our work in new and different ways that links back to the North Star that was discussed in the previous workshop. The TST committee is prepared to move forward with funding priorities that are associated with the initial allocation of funding that was received as a part of the budget process from the board. Today is an opportunity to ask questions of the rationale and understanding, discuss with community members, and then be poised for action moving forward. It's a big moment for those who questioned whether or not you could bring community and systems partners together in different relationships to see forward movement. I would cite today as an example of, yes, you can, and we have much more to do. I just want to express my sincere gratitude. I'm going to sit back and be quiet now and turn it over to TST Director Danny Givens.
Thank you, Ryan. Madam Chair, Board of Commissioners, I want to thank you all today. As I echo everything that Ryan has said, there has been a lot of work that has gone into this presentation that we have here today. And even in the face of COVID and the pandemic, folks have still, weathered virtual fallouts, right? We've had a lot of technical difficulties that have happened along the way, attempts at hybrid meetings that, technology wasn't working or serving us, but we still stay committed and at the table, and that is what's been extremely important about this collective. I would be remiss of me not to speak of the fact of how important it has been throughout this particular time for the collective to build trust. And when I speak of the collective, I'm talking about TST. I don't know if you all could really try on the garment of trust and new relationships during a pandemic that has social distance folks in more ways than one. But I can tell you that each person who is a part of the TST collective has stretched, has leaned in, has made it their commitment in business to make sure they show up to do this work. Why is it important? It's important for our ancestors who have been impacted by our systems. It is important for our loved ones who are presently being impacted by this system. It is important that we change the trajectory and transform the way we do business for our future loved ones that are on the way, amen? So with that being said, we're gonna get it started. The presentation is comprised of, is a collective of community members and TST system leads. Make no mistake, though you only see a iteration of the collective here, everyone a part of the collective contributed to this work. So you'll hear from Kai Yang, who is on by phone call, Beverly Bushyhead, who is on by way of Zoom. Tierra Caldwell couldn't make it today, unfortunately. John Day is present over here, and Claire Ware is on by Zoom. From our system side, we have Deputy County Manager Kathy Hedin. We have Ann Berry, who's contributed to this work, Lean Becker, and Sarah Holly. The goals for today for this workshop is to provide you all with an update on the TST efforts focusing on the grant expenditure proof of concept, and also to have a discussion with the county board. So to get just a little backdrop, I know we all know this, but I have to state it for the record. I think it's a powerful and historic time that we have in this moment. And TST is a shared decision-making initiative of community members in Ramsey County to rethink how the county delivers services and invest in community. TST is intended to change the way the county makes decisions about priorities, approaches, budgets, and program design by having community members at the table with an equal voice. We put together a framework that my beloved John Day is going to jump in and talk about here. I'll pitch it to John Day.
Pardon me? I missed that?
It's on you. Slide 5, sir.
Okay, thank you. And in front of you have our slide 5, the TST framework, investing resources differently. And I'm sure you recall from your memory that we covered this last summer, and you committed to memory, so you would know it without even have to look at it. I wanted to talk a little bit about some specifics in here, and then I'll open it up for if you have any questions or need clarification or rationale. And it's more of an example of what I had in mind when we were talking about investing resources differently. And on my community, specific to the American Indian, and I think it also follows other cultures and peoples, is that we have a number of people in the community of St. Paul, Ramsey County, that they go out in a community or within their own family, extended families, and help young parents raise their children. They help young parents and young families raise their children. And not only to raise them, but also to model good behavior. Teach them the lessons that are taught in our culture that make them strong and resilient enough to survive in a society that is really different from the way they were taught and brought up. But you can also survive in this society and prosper by following their instructions and listening to what they're teaching. Therefore, you can have the beliefs of the Anishinaabe, the Dakota, or other cultures within this dominant society and never have to change. But these people are usually, they're not in the county system. And they're usually elders, and they're usually on fixed income. And in our culture, if you want one of these people to help your family, you offer them tobacco. And they take the tobacco, and from there they're obligated to help you as long as you want. We'd like to offer them tobacco and saying, here's some money to help you, but a lot of families don't have that. But they're obligated to help you, and they'll do everything they can to help you get to where you're at now, to improve your life, your children's life, and the community life. And so like a mini grant, I was hoping that they or the people they're helping, their witnesses would say, can you help these people not only help them pay some of their bills, but also for gas when they just move around, and gas is going to be really important. And if we can do that, and these mini grants to me are not going to be $10,000, they're going to be, I have no idea what they're going to be, but they're going to be small. But it gives these people the opportunity to go out there and help as many families as they can, because this is what they feel is really important to them and important to the community and important to our culture, to keep that going. And so that's my reality of how we want to move this forward. And there are other areas that we talked about, the micro grants and the more larger nonprofit grants. So if you have any questions, I'm fine to trying to answer them, trying to find out whatever you want. I'm willing, and hopefully my members around you will help me also come up with the answers you're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
So I think I have the next slide. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, County Manager O'Connor. My name's Ling Becker. I'm the Workforce Solutions Director. I've had just the great privilege of working with the community as part of the TST work, and to kind of launch off of this previous slide that John was speaking off of. That was a slide that the county board saw at a previous workshop to really talk about how we're going to invest resources differently. And today you heard from some of the TSP members that we need to work on. What John was describing was really co-designing some funding ideas and programmatic ideas with the goal of ensuring that we're not doing business as usual. So as the presentation in the morning continues, you're going to hear about some new ways of thinking about how funds should be spent in order to transform systems and ultimately transform outcomes for those who've been most impacted by our county systems. I will be introducing to you quickly some innovative thinking about the mechanisms by which the funds would get out of the county and into the community. That's different than the way we do work today. In March, you had a full workshop day as a part of the Strategic Team Committee of the Whole. As you'll recall, CFO Alex Kutza talked greatly about efforts being made to reevaluate how we do procurement and the significant efforts being made on procurement redesign. And that work is really relevant in this conversation today. At that workshop, you heard about the many pain points we've heard from community when it came to community engagement, about the challenges of getting resources from the county when they need it in the way that they find most useful. In that workshop, our CFO also brought forth the idea that she would be piloting some proof of concepts for our county around how to do our procurement. And so last week, you actually approved a proof of concept for workforce solutions, which is very similar to what we're going to be talking about today. So before I go into more detail, I do really want to thank the finance department led by the CFO, and particularly thank Stacy DeAndrea from the county attorney's office. She worked really collaboratively with the community partners in order to get us to where we are today, after many weeks, to ensure that community voice, really the voice of John and our other community members, were centered in this work while also evaluating our due diligence legally to do this work as well. So the proof of concept that we're bringing to you will allow TST to be really more responsive to the community by creating improved mechanisms to get resources out. The proof of concept allows us to work outside of our traditional request for a proposal process, posting on Demand Star, or potentially eliminating the need to have sealed RFP openings and lots of bureaucracy that really make things just more difficult for the community. As you heard from so many in the community, as we heard from so many in the community, there are many barriers to applying for funding from the county. This proof of concept will allow people to complete a much simpler grant application. They'll be able to create a simplified work plan, a budget, resulting in grant agreements in order to provide these services. The applications would be reviewed based on eligibility with criteria really identified and collaborated upon by our community and systems members together in this work. And lastly, TST will regularly evaluate the status and the impact of these projects, and we'll talk more about that toward the end of the workshop. So just wanted to make those connections back to our procurement efforts. Thank you, Danny and Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Tanya Long, as I introduced myself, and I am American Indian and Black, and I'm a member of the Omaha tribe, and our people have been living in here since beginning of time in Minnesota with our relatives, the Dakota. So I just want to put that in there. Last summer, we did discuss how TST did come to recognize the North Star, which is child protection and foster care. So we looked at the 9 systems. The TST team was asked to identify what they felt was going wrong or what wasn't working. Those comments came in from the system and the community members. We came up with 133 things that were going wrong, and so then we had to narrow those down into some areas, and we had a full convening where the mechanism in which we use is the circle, where we go around to narrow that down, and from them 9 system areas, we came up with child protection. And if you look at that slide, it's the community. The community encompasses all our cultures, all our economics, all the people here in Ramsey County, and then we had our system area, and then we came to our North Star.
Thank you, Tanya. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I'll be sharing the next 2 slides with Beverly Bushyhead, who is online with us. So Tanya talked about the North Star. I think it's obvious when we take a look at these slides why we picked the North Star, and although the data here is from 2019, we know that the disparities in our systems exist. They've been there for a long time, and that nothing that we've been doing has changed those disparities. And I want to draw your attention specifically to, if you look at the red line is the number of children that are in the system, and the gold line is then the representation of the number of children in the population of Ramsey County. And where you can see there's clear overrepresentation of children in our system is in Black or African American families and their children, and in American Indian children and their families. This is something we talked about when we talked about the department's budget. We've been talking for a long time. We now feel that the way we've organized the work in TST, we're very much focused on the front end of our systems, right? How it is that children and families get into our child protection systems, with a very, very heavy emphasis on families, both from the Black community and the American Indian community, that are overrepresented in our systems. So that's what the slide shows. Beverly?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that something just anecdotally that we've discussed and sort of emerged from different folks in the field and people who are very expert at this particular topic, we determined and heard that there are different definitions depending on who's doing that assessment, who's doing that initial scrutiny. And so, for example, a group of social workers may see what is termed neglect differently, depending on who's presenting that, what family makeup that appears to them. And even within that field, there's not agreement on it. So that subjectivity is really important for us to understand, and will perhaps be a reason for this additional funding for particular groups to learn more about that. But because of that, we're wondering if this overrepresentation of particular racial groups, Native American groups, and Black and African groups are having this struggle in the system due to something like that. So we just think it's very compelling, and we hope that we have more to tell about that story as we move forward in this granting process.
Thank you, Beverly. Can we move to the next slide then? Because Beverly has helped us move right into that slide, which is three things that we want people to understand. First of all, in our system of mandated and voluntary reporters, which is how calls come into our system, that first graph you're looking at shows that 83% of calls come in from mandated reporters, right? Includes schools, law enforcement, hospitals, clinics, as of the last legislative session, parks and recs. We're adding more and more mandated reporters to the system, which means people are required to call in, which starts that path for children and families to be in our system. The second graph shows us that less than half of the reports that we get called in are actually screened into our system. So exactly the point that Beverly was making is that we do get a lot of calls that really don't belong in the child protection system, yet they still come to us. And one of the things we did at our TST convening was we actually simulated some calls. We had one of our screeners taking calls. They weren't real live calls, but they were examples of calls. And again, you could see what was happening is the way you present the information, how it's presented, can all take our screeners and our staff on different paths, right? So very important to understand how the system works. And then the bottom part of this slide shows us that, again, to Beverly's point, that almost half of the allegations or the calls that come in are referred to as neglect. And it's really important for us to take a look at what the meaning of neglect is, because neglect can look different to different people, our staff, different people in the community, to someone at the school. So again, these are all the issues that we're wrestling with as we do this work. But we thought it was really important to bring us back to understand exactly why we chose the North Star and why we think the funding will actually begin to address some of these issues that we've seen. Beverly, anything else to add?
No, great job. I agree completely with what you said. And I just think it's really important that we include additional folks in here, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on the slides that are coming.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I have a question from Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. I don't know if it's me or what. This is great information. I just want to make sure I fully understand it. On this page where I'm looking at the 5739 up top, and then in the middle of the page it says half of the allegations involve neglect, and that number is 10,777. Is it me, or is that not half? But
So these are
what am I not reading?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. So these are, so the first ones are screened in. So those actually get screened in.
5,000?
Right, 5,000 are. We get 10,000 calls. So So there's two things happening at the same time. One is about half get screened in, and about half of those calls are about neglect.
Okay.
Does that help?
And I was just misinterpreting because the top says reports made, and that should be reports screened in. Sure.
Thank you.
Is that correct?
You're correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Just for clarity then, because of where you're going, this would be a helpful follow-up then. So, and I appreciate the first question because it got me there. Of the calls then that actually get screened in, is it fair to assume the neglect calls are overrepresented in what does not get screened in or gets screened out then, based on the idea that you've been focusing on neglect?
Mr. Chairman and County Manager O'Connor, yes, it was another slide that we looked at, and we could add it into the deck here for your information, but yes, it is in the area of neglect where you see many screen outs. All right. Thank you.
A further comment, if I might, and just now that my head's on right, and I get that, I just want to say thank you because there has been much work done in Minnesota to encompass those neglect reports even more into screened in reports.
Yes.
So the work that you have been doing has been very carefully counter that direction. To ensure that we screen in those where we are concerned that young people are in danger, and that we also focus on supporting families so that children can stay in place, keeping families together, increasing their opportunity to flourish and grow if we're providing the supports that they need in place. So thank you for that careful work and for butting up against what could have been otherwise a trend to keep more children or to put more children into that screened-in category. Thank you.
Can I add one additional comment? I think it's important also that we recognize and understand that these different definitions need attention. There needs to be consideration about all of us agreeing and aligning on what are we talking about so that we're all comparing it in the same way. And I don't know what that looks like completely, but I think it's important to community and to transforming the system if we pay some attention to that. And that might be some of where the money goes to be helpful in transforming some work that's already occurring within Ramsey County. Which we'll talk about later. But I just want to make sure that we think what will be upstream from the problem of people getting into the Child Protection Service. Are we looking at it the same way? Are we all defining it the same way across the system?
Thank you, Beverly. John.
Mr. Chairman, I have slide 10, the funding strategies. Really, the initiatives that are being put forth are simply listed as individual grants, micro grants, and new equity grants. As I say, they were simply put down in that order. But from a community standpoint, and the TST community members, as we are able to list three, this was very time-consuming and painstaking. And I know you as commissioners have probably been through processes like this, and to expend or at least encumber $3.5 to $7 million is really difficult when we really don't come from a commissioner's point of view or from a systems point of view. We're community members. And we're literally developing a whole new process. And hopefully what we're putting out here makes sense to you. But I just want to point out that this is really difficult and time consuming. And it's also one tool in the many toolboxes we're trying to put out. So hopefully, it pays off and it takes us where we want to go. And also the second bullet point, the system transformation funds are centered on the North Star that we have identified. And in partnership with the county system people and the community system people, these initiatives really are to address those deficits that we see, the disparities that need to be addressed, and the equity, the racial equity that we want to improve throughout the county. And between the partnership that we have with the county systems and the community, that we really want to be the change agent that really drives us into the future, where we can better the lives of all the community members, especially those most vulnerable. And ideally, the greatest beneficiary to all of our efforts will be the community. Secondary, it would be the county, but both equally important. And hopefully these, the grant process will help the TST community and the systems community people achieve the highest level of community participation, including community involvement, collaboration, and empowering the community so that there's a realization that change is possible and change will be for the benefit of all. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
If I could just add to what, this is Kathy Hedin, Deputy County Manager, to what John Day said. I think as you heard John speak earlier in this presentation, how important it is in the ways in which we invest in community. I can't thank the community members enough and reiterate how difficult the process was to figure out a way to invest differently, knowing how our system puts money into communities, or how we grant specific organizations or different organizations in our community, and really helped those of us on the system end to think differently and to think outside the box and to think outside how we've been doing this in the past, to open our minds up to how we can do this in a way that will truly invest in community as a part of this North Star effort. And so I appreciate all of you for the work that you've done to get us to this place. And we'll move into laying out what these opportunities are with the TST grants.
Excuse me, Commissioner McDonough?
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a comment, or probably more of an observation, and this is really for the systems people, because I don't think we always start off with the high barriers and the cumbersome piece. But if things don't go the way we expect, something goes wrong, we're not getting the outcomes, we tend to use this big paintbrush, right? That then becomes the barrier for everybody, because we had an isolated incident, rather than dealing with this specifically and taking this easy approach of what we tend to in the past, you know, as a system of, well, we're never going to let this happen again, so we're going to do this to everybody. And that's one of the things that I think we really need to watch for as we move forward in evaluations and stuff, is how to make sure that we're addressing very specific things without building in more barriers or getting more cumbersome as the solution for maybe an isolated situation.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough.
Who's next, Dave?
Beverly. It's Beverly Bushyhead.
You're muted. I'm muted, sorry. One of the ways that we looked at this, I understand, Commissioner, your concern about where are the barriers and who do they present themselves for, and who's doing just fine in the system the way it is. And one of the things that we looked at from the community perspective was, where's the money going now? Who's actually being contracted, and who might be doing work that is not compensated at the county level, but the work is benefiting residents of Ramsey County. And so we broke these grants into 3 different sections. We looked at individuals who might be serving community, they're providing services now and not necessarily getting compensated for that. So they might need support for the work they're already delivering to community. And the way we looked at that was the criteria that they need to meet are that they are providing services in a really broad way to community that we can identify as Ramsey County residents who are benefiting from this. The other thing is it needs to be people who are not being infused and funded at this point. Also, they need to be responding to a crisis or some really demonstrated need within the community. And the maximum amount for that particular level, and that if they've met that criteria, is $10,000. And there's a budget of $750,000 for that particular category of grant. The focus area, while it is aligned with the North Star, is perhaps some of these other areas that are related to the North Star. So youth, elders, mental health. And these are folks who are not a nonprofit, who are not registered with the Secretary of State, who are not an LLC or in any way organized in that way. And from the county perspective, it might not be visible, but from the community perspective, we know this work is happening. And so we wanted to make sure to include them because at this point, they're not accessing the system for whatever reason. Lots of times it has to do with capacity. The second category that we looked at were micro grants, small grants for those who are serving the community. They demonstrate that they need additional funding, so perhaps to infuse support for costs that aren't being fully covered at this point. They're not being fully met, and to enrich those services and to keep them in place and continuing. The maximum amount they can apply for is $10,000 to $35,000, and the budget again for that is $750,000. The focus area will be directly related to the North Star. Again, all of these are, but directly serving youth. And there will be no funding that we will pay for staffing. So this isn't to create some more that's already in the infrastructure for their organization, but to enhance work that's already happening and just may not be fully covered. And then the third category are for new entities, new to Ramsey County servicing or nonprofits. And these are organizations that don't have a contract with Ramsey County at this point, but they serve across racial groups. That's the criteria they must meet to apply. They also need to be able to report out on their impact and their outcomes, demonstrate innovative initiatives that are not happening somewhere else. So it's not duplicating work. And the amount they can apply for is $50,000 to $100,000. The budget there, of course, is $1 million as the amount was bumped up a bit. And the focus area, again, aligned with the North Star, are youth, elders, mental health, and all of these folks need to be residents, serving residents of Ramsey County. And it helps if there are a cap. So we wanted to make sure that we don't encourage any kind of use of funds except for delivery of specific services. And so that's what these exclusions or limited costs entail. So new entity and nonprofits increase access to those who may have capacity challenges around grant making, but are delivering excellent and impactful services in community. So the areas that we thought were most addressed through this type of innovative funding is access, support, and greater services that are ongoing for Ramsey County residents. And we really thank everyone at Ramsey County who was so instrumental in helping us understand the process and helping us learn what we could do to fit well. And they have been incredibly collaborative and supportive. And I just really appreciate that. I want to thank them. Kathy, sorry, did I take it off?
You're good. You're good. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you, Ms. Beverly. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, County Manager O'Connor, thank you, Ms. Beverly, for providing us with more insight into the types of grants that TST would like to implement. Now we'd like to shift to take a deeper dive into how these funds will impact the community we are intending to reach. And so just to reiterate the focus on our individual grants, these are $10,000 individual grants that will be available to people who are providing services to community, volunteers that serve the community and need assistance to cover expenses related to that important work, and individuals who demonstrate that they have a great need or are in crisis and demonstrate service to their community. We know that as we continue to do this transformational work, many children and families remain involved in the system. The involved families have needs, oftentimes that the system cannot meet or that they are not eligible for. These individualized grants can help fill that need and gap that our systems currently cannot help with. Today, we will share examples that demonstrate the need for these supports as we implement transformational change. We want to make investments with these funds to ensure that children and families are reunited or so that families can stay together. Now I'll turn it over to Ms. Clara Ware to share her perspective on how these funds will benefit community. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and county commissioners and everyone in the room. I just want to speak to this slide, particularly because I was an individual as a single parent. Single parents could be a mother with children or a father who could be a single-headed household. I remember in the late 1990s when I became homeless with my kids. One of the issues that I was facing was homelessness. It wasn't. I just needed a place to stay. So I remember the sheriff coming to take me and my kids to Hennepin County. And at that point, what happened is that I had the money that I had in my pocket, I had to spend on it. So I continued for about a month with my kids being homeless. And I remember when I did call the after-hour services for some assistance with help with finding me and my kids a place to stay. I had 3 kids at the time. One of them was disabled. So there should have been no separation with me and her because she had a resuscitated order. She had a heart disease, so they wasn't even supposed to remove her from my care. But anyway, I remember making that call down at 1010 Cary to get some help for me and my kids, and I was waiting at 1010 Cary. And then all of a sudden, I seen the police come and the child protection worker come, and I'm like, I was calling maybe somebody maybe could put us in a shelter or put us into a hotel, and we was not even given that option. So they removed my daughter from my care, my sons from my care. I was placed at 1010 Cary, and then my kids were placed in some kind of foster facility. But that being said, then I was offered a case at the time, and I remember no services. Nobody asked me, would I like to have a job? Would I like to go to school? I was mainly treated like I was some outcast, a bad parent. All I needed was a place to stay. But I tell my story because I know that not only me, there are still women in shelters, there are still homeless families out there. And I think that accessing these funds like this individual grant for $10,000, I know at that point, if I had got $10,000, I would have been able to have a paid first month rent, probably the deposit, probably some child care, and look for a job at the time. But I wouldn't offer that. So my question is today, is homelessness considered as a reason to call child protection workers to come and take your kids away from you? Because the trauma that I experienced trying to get my kids back, it took me quite a while to get my kids back. So what I'm saying today, I think that if these parents are able to access these funds, you know, they could be out of shelters quicker, or they could be out of child protection quicker. And it'd be like a transformative measure because you wouldn't necessarily have to do a case plan right away because you could have housing. So that's what I'm speaking on today, that if these funds were given to these single-headed house or any family that needed access to housing or education or childcare, these funds would be available. And this process that we have would be easier for parents in Ramsey County to apply for the funds, because in Ramsey County, if you use up your 5 years, you don't receive services anymore. And the other thing, they only pay deposit every so often. So I feel like if this was created like a safety net for funds for parent assets, that would be excellent. So thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you, Clara.
Thank you.
The next was the micro grants. So my lived experience as a foster parent in Ramsey County, and I've had 24 foster children. I adopted 4 out of the system, and then my bio children. But part of that was the needs that the children need. And a lot of times there's opportunities out there for youth, but when you have foster children, you might get them today and the deadline was last week. Or you call for a program and they have enough to serve 40 students, but they don't have enough to add like another 10. So these micro grants, which are 10 to 35,000, while they are running a program for youth, foster youth, or children who might be at risk of becoming out-of-home placement, this would help add to their current contract or their current program to expand to serve more of these children. I just have to say that it has been very frustrating over the last 19 years providing foster care to children, getting those children into your home when you're trying to find resources for them right away. And these deadlines and timelines and having the right information prevents those children from participating in the community and feeling normal and whole as they did before. And so we really look forward to these micro grants, and so that they're, I'm sorry to keep saying and, so that these children are not turned away, and looking at it in a different way, that it's not about planning because these children are removed. It's not planned to remove them, and meeting the needs of these foster youth at that time.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. I'm just going to elaborate a little more on the micro grants. I really think this is one of those opportunities where we can sprinkle in, like, into some of the gaps of our systems and the way we fund organizations currently in the county. Much of our funds are passed through where we have really prescriptive ways that we do things, and organizations sort of have to get all these ducks lined up in a row in order to, like, deliver certain types of services. In the community, their needs are more flexible than that, and we need to be more nimble than that. And these funds allow for a certain amount of flexibility in working with organizations we already do contract with. And I oftentimes describe our services as a grocery store. Unfortunately, it's only open certain days for some people. You can only buy things on the bottom shelf on Mondays. To come back on Tuesday, we'll give you something off the aisle 4. You know, this allows somebody to come into that store and potentially get all the things that they potentially need. They might not be big things, but they are things that at the critical juncture of getting them when you need them, at the moment when it's most beneficial and impactful for that individual, is really important. You know, I'll take that analogy a little further. You're making your Thanksgiving meal. It doesn't matter when you get all the ingredients throughout April, June, whatever, you know, you needed them at Thanksgiving, right? And so I think it's just really this thinking about, we have a system, that store exists. It functionally, we have aisles and places where those funding streams work, but we need to be able to empower community to be able to come in and work with some of our organizations we already have trusted relationships with. This particular micro grant is with organizations we've already developed relationships with. But to trust that judgment of that organization, that we say, when we often talk about community-based organizations, it's about, we know you are closest to the community, but we don't put that funding into their hands as a way that they can be responsive. And so I really, I think this is an amazing idea that the community came up with, that as systems, it's taken us some time to wrestle with, but I think there's a real opportunity here for the county to do something really different in this space. So thank you.
Thank you, Ling and Tanya. Is Kaying still with us? I know that she's on the call and has to leave at 11:30. Just want to check and see if Kaying is still with us.
Ka Ying had to leave.
Kaying had to leave? Okay. John Day, I can be helpful here with you as well. Just want to kick it off.
14?
Yep.
Yes.
I think when I personally think about the new equity and nonprofit organizations that we're looking at, with a maximum amount of 50,000 to 100,000. As we, as community members, discuss this, I was less likely to fund your typical nonprofit out there. I know there are small nonprofits in Ramsey County that help people and I really wanted to give them a helping hand in this respect. It could be, a family does a lot of good work in a community for families and individuals. And they can only do so much because they're poor. They don't have this big funding arm. But I think if we could step in and 5,000, 10,000, or 15,000 to them would be a lot of money. Your normal large nonprofit, you give them 100,000, they'll say, what can I do with 100,000? They do good work, but still that's a very small amount for them. And I'm thinking there are a number of people and individuals that have nonprofits that we may not even know about. I mean, is there anybody in here can tell me how many nonprofits are in Ramsey County? That's one of the questions I've been trying to get. And since I'm a retiree, I really haven't worked real hard trying to get that information. So I'm kind of hoping that it just falls on me, but I guess I'll have to go out there and find some of that myself. But anyway, that's kind of the thought I had, because when we are helping the larger nonprofits, seldom do they come up with what we're thinking of as community members, as county TST members, that we want to do something totally different. And that, I could find that to be very, very difficult if I were working for the county. Because you have everything written in front of you. The ship we're all on is going straight through the ocean, and we want to turn it. Well, this bureaucracy is so big that if we all get on board and we all push to turn it at once, it's going to just move very little over a long time. But that's where we're headed, and that's what we have to do. If we want to fund things differently, just for example, as a county, we help a family. We think about all the services we provide them, and chances are when we put it all together, what we actually give them is going to be about 2/3 of what they need. And I always say, why don't we just give them what they need? Because if I'm poor and I have $100 and you give me 90, where am I going to find 10 more dollars? Why don't we just give them that 10 and make it easy and it's done with? Something we don't have to worry about. It's kind of my thoughts on the larger grants. And I know my fellow community members went through a lot of discussion on this, and if they want to pipe up, I'd appreciate it right now.
Thank you, John. I can jump in here too, and if you want to jump in, Tanya. And with Mr. Chair and the rest of the board, in looking at this, we just over the past couple of years during the pandemic, I can't begin to call to mind how many new entities and nonprofits have both been started and fallen under, with respect of trying to meet the needs of our youth that have aged out of our foster care system, to meet the needs of our system-involved youth who haven't found landing strips because during COVID, right, a lot of the places where they could land as far as with housing or alternatives were already booked up, but we're now at a smaller capacity. And I think about these other organizations that have been able to survive COVID somehow, right, have been impacted in staffing, have even been impacted in their ability to serve, right, and still yet stay committed at the table to bring these services to community, bring these culturally specific and relevant services to community, oftentimes waiting on reimbursement from third-party payers that sometimes doesn't come in time to make payroll for those community members who impacted doing this work for those that are most impacted. And so I think it's important to lift that up, how these new entity and nonprofit grants will help to build up that capacity, that technical support. It doesn't become transactional in the sense where, okay, we come in, as John gave the illustration of a family in need of having a $100 bill paid, right? We get the bill paid, but then what about being able to sustain beyond it? That bill is going to come back around another month. It's just how things work, unfortunately, right? And so when we start talking about capacity speaks to the sustainability for success for our youth and our families who have been impacted by this in particular North Star, to be able to successfully transition not only through our programs, but to successfully transition in community to be able to better serve and be those lights and credible messengers, if you will, to others who have been impacted. Is there something else you'd like to add?
No, I just would like to add that I just think that this is a wonderful opportunity, and I'm so grateful that you had the foresight to see that you need to go to community and ask what they need and how they need it. And I'm a community member. Some call me an elder. I feel a little strange, but accepting that title. But as I live in this community and have since I've moved here since the late 90s, the people come to me and they ask these questions or trying to get help, try to navigate these systems. And when you look at something, for an example, there was a domestic abuse mother, and I'm looking online, helping her, trying to search for services. And then it would say safe at home, but it wasn't anything like what we were thinking it would be. It was a good, needed program, but it wasn't what she needed. And the perimeters that they typically have, because of the grant money they have funding them, kept them to what they were doing. But when you turn to the community and say, what is it you need? How do you need it? When do you need it? These are innovative, these are transformative, and this really meets the need to keep our children safe with their families intact. And so that's the reason the community members came up with this, because it was from the community seeing how their lived experience was affected and what would made that better for them, which would have prevented out-of-home placement in the beginning, in the first place. And so that's the take when we're looking at all these grants, is what the community needs and how they need it. And I know it was your foresight that seen this too, and so I'm just gonna say thank you for that. Working with the system leaders and getting their perspective, and even for those who work in the system and say, they see what's wrong, but they're working within this structure, and they have to follow their rules and policies in that structure. And so this transforming system together is just beautiful. I just can say it's beautiful. And working with procurement, when we first met with them, they were like, well, yeah, we're thinking couple years, and we're like, the community was like, no, that's not gonna work. We're thinking 3 months. And it was amazing to have them come back, and they were doing it. It was like, this is what we can, and we have the state statutes, we have the state rules, but man, when it came to us partnering and coming together, it was done, and we have this. And I just can't tell you how excited and elated I just feel with this partnership and having the opportunity for all the community members who are not system people brought to the table and really heard and listened to.
Mr. Chair, can I just say one thing after Tanya? I think, I want to tie back to that proof of concept, because I think this whole idea of, we brought community to the table to come up with new ideas, but we also needed to bring forth some change in the way we do things. Otherwise, we're going to be back to where we were. There's really no point in having all these great ideas if the community's going to have all these barriers to trying to implement some of the things that we've talked about. And so I think that connection back is that I think this is a dual track of transformation, where we have not only the actual programmatic things that we're talking about with you today and the ideas that community's coming forth, but really the processes in the county that are working as well, that have to go at the pace of what the community's asking for. And I really do want you to be able to see that those are going hand in hand. And lastly, with that final grant program that they were speaking about so eloquently around the new entities, that's essential, that new process for new entities to do business with the county. And so for that program to be successful, we really do need to reduce barriers and not do these RFPs like we have had, and not put things into demand STAR we need to break down some of these systems. So I just wanted you to kind of be able to see that it's kind of happening above the surface with the community, but also inside our organization too, to sort of break through some things that we know have been problematic. And this is a good opportunity for us to do it hand in hand with them. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mary Jo,
Thank you.
had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's so great to hear that, Director Becker. about how we are transforming our own systems based on what community, and thank you, community, for being there, and Director Givens, oh my goodness. I mean, this is all really exciting work, so I couldn't be more grateful to everyone who's doing it all. I just would like if you could just expand a little bit, because I think a number of us have been a part of nonprofits, and so much of nonprofit costs is actually in staffing. You know, it's the people that are doing the work, and so I know that in the grid that I've seen, you know, staffing is really limited or none at all. Like, you can't put any of this money to staffing because most of it is passed through to the community. I'm getting. Could you just expand on that a little bit about we're really limiting the amount that you can put into the nonprofit itself or into the entity itself? And I want them to be able to sustain themselves so that they can be the pass-through organization. And so just, I'm just noticing that in this.
So I'd like to give an example. I'm sorry, being Indian, we do storytelling. So I'll give you an example. There's a housing advocate, and they have this nonprofit has a grant through the county. And I called them, and I said, well, I have a situation, and a community member. So I don't have a job, I don't have business. They just reach out to me. And I said, so we're looking for housing, someone who will take someone with a criminal record, someone who's been in domestic abuse, whose landlord is, you know, not being cooperative, even though it's the law, because it's really like, haha, what you gonna do to me? And the housing advocate says, well, do you have pen and paper? And I said, yes. And he said, it's called housinglink.com. Well, I know housinglink.com. It's a listing of rental properties, but there's no relationship, there's no connection. What this person needed was an organization that had a housing advocate who networked and worked with landlords and who would understand that the situation that this person is coming from would bypass maybe their criteria so that they could keep their children intact and move. And so when we say you hire someone, and so this housing advocate is doing what they're supposed to do within the perimeters that they already have existed, but is it really meeting the need of the community members? And no, it's not. So we didn't want to pay someone benefits to sit at a computer to give you a link to housinglink.com, which is a perfectly fine. If I have no barriers, I go in there, I could find a place to live, and you know, that's great. But if I have barriers, there's no relationship. And a lot of money goes to hiring staff when sometimes it's just that extra bump that family needs to stay intact and stay together. And so that's why there was the focus of, we're just not trying to create jobs for people, we're trying to up the services to help keep families intact.
And if I can add.
Thank you, thank you.
And if I could add, so with respect to the individual and micro grants, so echoing what Tanya had said, Mr. Chair and the board, was the micro and individual grants are to get that money directly to those most impacted who need it. Under the new entity and nonprofits, there is a 15% max that we have allotted for staff and administrative costs. So if in particular, if, for example, if a nonprofit got a $100,000 grant, they could use $15,000 of that to, support some of the staffing. So again, to speak to this of making sure that we're getting the resources into the hands of those who most need it. And that, I believe a lot of the new organizations and nonprofits would love to be in a position to do such, but under the current system and structure, and then to meet these growing demands, it's like, well, let's kick up the staffing more, which then pulls away from the resource pool that we have to meet the demands of our families that are impacted.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Those are both great examples, and just helps me understand it better. Thank you. Thank you.
You have Commissioner Carter, then McDonough.
And just an observation, I'm so thankful that you added that, Danny, because it does seem as though those are the kinds of organizations who face this barrier. We'll only fund you if you don't need our funding, And so we are opening up in the recommendation that you've made to ensure that those organizations who would do the kind of work, Tanya, that you mentioned, are able to create and innovate because they actually can get through this process. There's a process for them that's friendlier, that allows them to come in and get the support to do that new and innovative kind of help work that is needed. And I just wanted to underscore that. That is so important. So I'm glad to see that we're focusing on getting the funds to individuals and most impacted, helpers as well. And then also we have the new entity nonprofit recommendation. Thank you for those.
Yep. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So listening to all three kind of pots here and kind of how things laid out, I kind of keep going back to some of the conversations we had, early on when we were looking at like our contracting for, construction, roads, that type of thing, and some of the things were the same, right? And some of the creative approaches that, we pushed were some of the responses we got from folks that hadn't bid on our work, minority-owned businesses, small businesses, women-owned businesses, is, they couldn't afford the bonding. They didn't have the capacity to actually respond and get through an RFP. They didn't have the capacity to do the reporting back. And so those were, system barriers that were created. Some of the responses were similar to what you're talking about here. But really the biggest response in helping kind of transform systems is part of the requirements of, the bigger contracts needed to include some of these smaller contractors as subs and leverage their capacity for bonding, leverage their capacity for reporting, leverage their capacity to actually be responsive. But then, part of them being successful was them engaging with these other organizations in that business to help them be successful with those dollars too. So I'm just wondering how much of a conversation or, what's next, because we have the big dogs that have been doing this for a long time. They got very good at how to respond to RFPs, how to adjust so that they fit what we've been looking for. And, in which ways can we help them actually become more responsive to the community by, how we put out those RFPs where they need to be more inclusive with partnering with community, utilizing their expertise and helping support that community, with their capacities that they've done. But then at the same time, helping transform them and how they take a look at, how they support our community at the same time. And I don't know if those conversations have perked up, if we're kind of just looking way over here, or that has kind of moved into kind of the existing work. There's a lot of money already going out the door to a lot of big organizations that are already doing this work. And how do we help leverage not only their expertise and strengths, but how do we help maybe transform their thinking on how they're responding within the community to get better outcomes?
Definitely. Thank you, Commissioner. I think within this of tapping into the Ramsey County values of investing in community and equity, and we speak to our smaller orgs and or our individuals that are out doing this work, I give the visual of the parable of the sower. It's our smaller entities and our orgs and our individuals who are out there seeding this work and are oftentimes seeding this work and financing it out of their own passion and little to no resources with this. There's an ecosystem that I believe is created within our communities that this work is happening in, but because of the challenges around in need of technical assistance, in need of having the kind of capacity in place to be able to compete with like a United Way or others, and no shade to United Way, but others that like have people in place that can spit out a grant in 5 minutes, right? To be able to seed those folks in a way to be able to level the playing field, if you will, to where a lot of times there's already this cross-pollination. There's already someone that has a relationship with maybe a case manager that's within Wilder Foundation that's getting a larger, but this community member has already cultivated that kind of relationship. They can't afford to be present in the ways to support the work successfully and show up in these collaborative meetings in the daytime, that community partnership meetings. Like there's a lot of pieces that contribute to this. These resources will help provide an opportunity for that collaborative and that intersectional work. I believe that we're going to see a lot more transformation happening than what we're just seeing in being able to put this money out. I believe that we're going to come with some new findings after our evaluations go through in the next 6 months or so that is really going to be telling of how this will play out.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to echo what you just said, because I think that's the key. And I've been quiet listening to everybody and my colleagues that have come up with good suggestions. But, you know, God, it's going to be almost 40 years now when we started Clues in the community. That is exactly the scenario. United Way didn't want to look at us. Ramsey County didn't want to look at us. And we started as a little micro organization with getting this kind of money from churches and different organizations, and that moves on. And there is a transformation that takes place, but that transformation has to continue.
True.
We have a lot of nonprofits in our communities that need to change. They're still working on a good formula, but it's a formula 40 years ago, and I'm speaking about all of them. But I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of it's an ongoing process, it's a slow process, and it's one that we plant seeds here now. And I think the community is right on with these recommendations. I have Nicole, and then I have Trista.
I have two things. So the first is a logistical question with this, and what I'm hearing is the goal is to get the money in the hands of the community. Is this going to be in like cash into community members or in kind? My concern here is what impact it might have on people's public assistance eligibility if they were to get $1,000. And we might do more harm than good if it pushes them off. And is this something where I believe there was some other program, a similar pilot program where there was an exemption from counting dollars as income for those programs, and is that something we need to lobby for to make that doable, or is this going to be going out as in-kind grants filtered through another organization?
Commissioner Fretham, great question. Something that we think a lot about overseeing the Public Assistance Cash Program. Certainly, I think we haven't had this conversation with community, but certainly connecting folks who are recipients to that benefits calculator to determine, and some benefits counseling to determine whether or not those trade-offs are something that they need to acknowledge, that if there's going to be some impacts potentially, it's not something we've directly talked about. The other thing would be, I know the city of St. Paul with their universal basic income pilot, has gone to the legislature to have conversations about these types of exemptions, and should we decide that this is something that the county wants to do, there's definitely partners that are saying, we're doing other innovative financial empowerment type efforts, and could we partner together to have those conversations with DHS? So Tina Curry and I were in some conversations with DHS this year, in support of St. Paul's universal basic income to not have that impact their benefits. So, yeah, great points.
That was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
And do you have more? Sorry.
Yep.
So, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Fretham, so we actually, Social Services had advanced some language this session that would have provided for exclusions in certain circumstances to avoid child protection, and as a way to fit nicely with what was, we couldn't have predicted what was going to happen, but we know that in other circumstances where we provide resources and what I would call an investment to families, there is always the question about the value, and does that change the calculation around income and assets for eligibility in whether it's income assistance programs or medical programs. There's also a way, I think, to work together so that there can also be a third party or, as you said, in-kind payments. So we will continue to navigate this, and if one of the biggest barriers is a loss of eligibility for other programs, then we've got other design work that needs to take place.
Yeah, and one last thing, I just remembered, I mentioned to General Rourke, I think for the following year, for our legislative work, we've been talking to the United Way about their effort to have income be checked more infrequently, around a 6-month check. And so there are other ways to kind of maybe work on the state to sort of increase some flexibility, Commissioner. So that'd be another avenue, is to decrease the amount of monthly income checking.
Great, thanks. That was the alarm bell ringing for me with
Yeah.
whenever you're talking about giving folks direct cash is, it's going to kick them off of other programs
Yep.
and it'll be so much worse if we hadn't given them
Yep, good point.
$500. I guess the other, hearing, the conversation around staffing and whatnot, I'm still wrestling with it because what I've heard is, there's a need for people to have relationship. Well, that's staff dollars and staff time, and it's something a lot of nonprofits can't afford. And it's okay to go in another direction, and we're doing some relationship work with our family coaches and whatnot. And I guess the question is then, this is no value judgment on any decision that going towards this. I'm thinking, okay, if I'm on the board of some nonprofits, what is a micro grant? What could I have done in previous positions to have enhanced my services to have potentially reduced child protection touches, right? And for me, I think about diapers. I think about the number of times I had a staff person said, this parent is always bringing their kid in dirty diapers, we should report them for neglect. And that's because there is no program out there that will give you free diapers, and they're insanely expensive. And to think about something like someone who's already providing services, so we're on the board of CAP-RW, we have Head Start and Early Head Start, we are serving children in diapers. As an in-kind expense, how much money would a family save if a program like that that's already helping people could just provide diapers to families? Because there's no one else doing it. It's a gap in our support system. And it would certainly have a ripple effect if then I'm not spending $60 a month on diapers. I can spend that on my bill that's going to come around next month. So I guess I'm wondering, is that the direction you're going for those gaps that we don't know about, for those people who are already serving folks, versus the examples we've heard about that would be really staffing intensive and need the capacity to have time to build relationships? And I think there's value in both of those. I see immense value, but just thinking about how would this play out in an actual community and what's going to have those ripple effects on families without pushing them off the existing safety nets that are there.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Danny. So we are thinking about that. And we did have some small conversations about people who are on benefits. Like one thing, for example, medical assistance. You can't have anything over 10,000. So that was one of the reasons why we selected or suggested that 10,000 for those individual grants. The other thing we looked into is like when you get a lump sum like this, like there's things that are excluded. Some programs will exclude grants, so it's like how you title it, having a law degree, looking at those loopholes, how, you can fit into what the perimeters that are already there. The thing I wanted to say, though, is addressing relationships. I use that as an example, but as a community, equal family advocate, it's like when they come, it's what do you need and how we can figure it out. And like I said, I don't have a job, I don't have a business. I just do that for the community because they need it. I'm part of this community, and I was reared that you give back civically somehow, some way. That's your role of being a human being and being part of a community. So when we're looking at these nonprofits, it's you apply for grants, and they change depending on how that money flow is and what those grants are, proposals that are put out there. And this is transformative because it's the community saying, this is what we need and how we need it. So they're going to have to readjust to meet the community needs rather than the needs of who typically are funding them and the perimeters that they set. And so, yes, building relationships is important, but if you're a community member, that should be normal. And it's not. And so we need to get back to that so that if I come to you, you're not just a siloed person and all you know is how to navigate the internet, but you have some connections. And if we all have connections, and I know I could go to Ling for something because I know what she does, or I can help spread that word to other people in the community and they know that they can go to Ling. It's building that tighter knit connection. And so our vision is, if you think of a spider web, and say we have a spider web and we each got a piece of that. And if I let mine go down, then you have to pull yours up tighter, so we're keeping that web tight. So we're all interconnected. And if you just can visualize the spider web, how it's not this uniform, succinct pattern, it's different. And that's our community. Everyone in that, every link of that web is different. And our members are there, and we need to support it. And so everyone, part of it needs to support it. So if somebody's lacking, it needs to pick up. If you need to strengthen that relationship, if you need to network and go out, that it's there. So it's having nonprofits look at things differently than the way that it's always been done. So I'm going to give you a grant, but you got to serve this many people from this community and this and that. But then you might have someone else come in and say, you know, that would work for me, but nope, you're not in our perimeter, you're not in our criteria. So we want to look at it in the very broad sense. Child protection, you know, we're not narrowing it to removal and just, you know, therapy and parenting classes and drug testing. It's like, what would prevent it? We want to do upstream. The federal legislation that has is that they want to move funding upstream. We want to be upstream. And so we have to think innovatively of how that is. And they're going to have to get on board, but I really believe a lot of nonprofits that I know that I work with or use their services, they would discuss to me the problems that they have because of the perimeters of how the funding came to them in the first place. And I see Transforming Systems doing that.
Thank you, Tanya. I do want to, board, let you all know we have 3 more slides.
Okay, hold on, Danny. I have Trista, and then we have another.
I'll let him finish and I'll just wrap it then.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Danny.
And so I know we're getting.
So I can take this, I'll get us started on this one. So we've talked about the individual micro grants and new entity grants. This last group of grants are system transformation grants. So while we're talking about all the reform that needs to take place in our system and the resources and investments that need to go there at different levels and in different ways, we also know we're going to need resources to make large transformational changes in our systems. So we set out this slide for you in a contextual way, not in actual decisions. So the examples here are just examples that we made up because we're doing the work right now. We're thinking about the big transformational ideas. We've formed ourselves into groups. We're looking at different parts of the systems. We're looking at the definition of neglect. And so we know out of that work will come some systems investments that are required, and how we make those investments could look different than putting money into the systems. But we've set aside, we agreed collectively to set aside about $1 million to fund some of those transformational ideas. A couple of examples are here, and I know we're trying to move quickly, but again, community being reporters. Being the first screening or the first call for reporting was one. Mentors or credible messengers in schools. I mean, there's other ways for us to make investments so that children and families do not touch our child protection systems. So I know I went through that quickly, but these are funds for transformation as well.
Beverly, are you on? I think, would you want to lead this last slide before I start?
I am on.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I love the diaper example, and something that makes me think of how that might play out is in evaluation, how we evaluate the status and impact of our work plan and what the nonprofits, individuals, and micro grant recipients consider their work plan, how it has impacted those grantees. We will be looking at that. We will be looking at what co-created the systems criteria and how that's working. Is that working well for folks? So the idea about are people losing money or was a fiscal agent important, that kind of thing will be measured and considered after the fact, after the grant making. And we'll also have periodic periods where we check in to see how's it going. I think it's really important that we understand that qualitative as well as quantitative. To Tanya's point, the stories that are being told by recipients, the stories that are being told by these nonprofits and these individuals, as well as measurable outcomes that are numbers and percentage based. We have looked at several different methods of evaluation. One of the methods that we like is the ripple effect mapping. It works really well with complex challenges that are sort of far flung geographically and that are also working to solve problems that are complicated. And so that involves the system, that involves individuals, that involves community. We believe this is a really helpful tool. And basically what it measures is how one change rippled out and created impact that benefits our community. I think it's really important. Several of the questions that were asked today made me think of this. This TST and Ramsey County efforts are under great public scrutiny. It'll require our full attention of how the funds are granted through all the various ways we've discussed, how we evaluate that. And I think that those evaluative measures need to be really compelling to the community story, to the county areas of service and their success measures and beyond, because I know people are watching this. Ramsey County is the first place to do this. And so this story will be going beyond even our state. And so I really think those case studies and the impacts felt will make a difference for Ramsey County. And it's really, I think, an exciting time. It's a lot of work, but I think it's really important for us to succeed. And so how we evaluate that and the rigor that we bring to it is really important. Anything, Ling, to add?
You know, you said it so beautifully, Beverly. I think the only thing I would ask is, I think this is an area that as county systems members, we're going to be learning a lot from the community, and it's going to bear fruit into a lot of other areas of our work. So thank you. Thank you.
Tristan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone who presented. I think, Tanya, I know 10 community members just like you that have put your whole heart and soul, but don't get paid to do this work, and so I'm really excited. I'm already listing the folks I'm going to reach out to when these become available to apply, because there's so many people that give so much to community and have, because their own experience, have had to navigate our systems, that they can help others, but also don't have the resources to do it themselves. And then some of them take their passion, as Danny, you so well put it, they put their passion and fuel and create nonprofits, but they don't have 2 pennies to rub together. And so I'm thinking of all these folks that have come to us, that have called and said, I'm a foster parent, I care about community, I'm distributing food to the community, I'm helping people get housed, I don't have 2 pennies myself, but it doesn't matter. And so what I'm wondering is, can people get both? And I would advocate for yes, but I just want to say is that they can take care of at home, and many of nonprofit folks are the poorest people I know, and they're running an organization, and that they could potentially get both if they're serving community in that way. And then my second question is, I love evaluation because it helps us learn and grow and do more, and it helps us validate that this will work. I believe that it will work, and I love that community brought this, because solutions always come from the community, and it's our job to be facilitators of implementing. But as we evaluate, how is that going to be done? Who is going to do it? Are our internal folks going to be evaluating? Are we going to contract? Is that another opportunity for a community member potentially to get a grant to do that work? What does that look like?
So it's going to be yes, yes, and yes.
Excellent.
So
That's
yes,
what I wanted to hear.
yes to both. In the sense that we, the collective, have had much conversation about this not even being a one-time thing. That folks are able to come back again and not just have to wait till the next cycle. There may be a need for that. So yes, it's both the individual as well as an entity there. And the latter part around evaluation is that we'll be working with finance, county attorney's office, as well as the iteration of community members and system leads to move with the evaluation. I've been talking with Alex, sent her an email last week. Again, Alex, the finance, procurement, and contract team have been extremely amazing during this time. I know that they're working on a modernization of procurement and contracting at this time, so it landed at kind of one of those perfect times for us. So that's a process that we have in place, and the other piece around was that we will keep you all, there will be updates moving forward, so it won't be a year past before you all hear how it's going on. We'll give you guys, ongoing updates as the work is progressing forward.
Okay, awesome. Good, thank you.
I wanted to speak briefly to something Commissioner Fretham had spoke to with respect to the diapers. I was thinking about during the civil unrest. I'm a retired activist and organizer. And I remember during the civil unrest with our beloved George Floyd being murdered, there were many community members, both in Ramsey and Hennepin County, that were just mobilizing and making things happen. In particular, in Ramsey County, Healing Streets was able to partner with Tish Jones, Nick Muhammad, and other community members who were just organically fueling this work with passion. And so there was just that. There was this diaper bank. I know of it because I had just had a baby born at the very beginning of it, and they gave me some on the strength, right? But it was one of those pieces of that is still happening. And it's happening in silos. And I know that we showed up, Sarah Holly and her team and Prince Colbert that showed up to help assist in a lot of the pop-out, needs that were happening throughout the community. But that work is still ongoing. So this will be an opportunity for even those folks who are doing just that, doing the diapers, doing the formula. We're seeing a shortage of formula right now, right? Being able to have those resources there and it not come out of the sacrifice of self. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the community members. You did a fantastic job, believe me. And we're going to move these recommendations forwards, but let me just...
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the process piece right here is we're going to reflect on what we heard today. The community and committee members want to work on that. We have a request for board action that we've been developing. I think you'll see it in the next week or so come forward that actionize it. That's not a word, but we're going to use it today. That takes these visions into action. I want to close on a couple of points. And I had a lot I could have said the whole time. I just want everyone else's words to speak for it. This is both about using 0.25% of the county's overall budget fundamentally different in a way that informs 100% of our work. And I think that's a really important piece to think about. There were many times where I wanted to jump in and say, we should do that, but we shouldn't leave it to TST to be the spot that happens. And that applies pretty broadly across a lot of this and what we can learn from our work. There is a shared responsibility. I appreciate that it came up here with the committee about the importance of doing this right, that we don't get multiple chances to prove a new concept in a way that changes the way we do our work. I had an opportunity to sit with our committee in the evening about a week and a half ago, and I felt that deep responsibility felt on their end, and I appreciate that as we bring this forward. And finally, from the finance and procurement side, we're doing this all within existing legalities around finance and procurement. We're following practices to do that work. We're making sure there are still appropriate sign-offs and eyes on these pieces as you move. And so I want to bring assurance to that about continued responsibility across how we spend money, and yet at the same time realizing that we can do better. We can do better and we will. And so with that, Mr. Chair, we look forward to bringing this forward in the coming couple weeks.
And again, thank you to the community and the members sticking to it. And a great job by the staff. Thank you all.
And thank you to our PowerPoint slide presenter.
Thank you.
That's a lot.
Couldn't have done it without you.
Really exciting work. Oh my God. Thank you so much.